The room felt heavy before anyone even spoke. The kind of quiet that presses against your skin and reminds you that something important is about to happen. I sat at the defense table in my own courtroom, 34 years old, my thumb slowly rubbing the edge of the red wolf scarf folded neatly in my lap. The fabric was worn thin with time, but I kept it close, like a habit I never unlearned. Across the aisle, Kevin and Karen sat with their attorney, smiling, laughing, leaning in close as if they were already celebrating. In their minds, the $5.5 million was already theirs. They were already spending it. New homes, new lives, new stories to tell. They did not recognize me, not my face, not my posture, not the calm I carried. To them, I was just another woman sitting quietly at a table. Then the bailiff's voice cut clean through the room, sharp and formal. All rise for the Honorable Judge Samantha Hart. Chairs scraped back. My parents stood, expecting a stranger to appear from behind the bench. Instead, I stood with them. I stepped forward, walked past the bar, climbed the steps, and took my seat where the judge belonged. The smile on their lawyer's face froze in place, like it had been carved from stone. The room held its breath. I needed them to understand that today, the silence belonged to me. I needed them to feel what it was like to have their fate decided without their control. I wanted the weight of that moment to settle deep before anything else was said. I wanted the world to pause right there, before the truth arrived. It was 1994, and O'Hare International Airport was the loudest place on Earth. Terminal 3 pulsed with sound and movement. The floor vibrated under my sneakers from the endless rush of footsteps and rolling luggage. Announcements echoed overhead. Conveyor belts hummed without rest. Voices overlapped, laughed, argued, rushed. Yet somehow, in all that motion, I felt completely still. I was 5 years old and felt like a stone dropped into a river, unmoving while everything else flowed around me. I was wrapped in a red wool scarf that scratched my neck and dragged along the dirty linoleum. It was too long and too warm, but I refused to take it off. It was the only thing protecting me from the cold air that blasted in every time the automatic doors opened. Kevin and Karen walked ahead of me. They did not hold my hand. They did not slow their pace. They checked their watches again and again, their steps sharp and impatient. They did not look like parents about to lose a child. They looked like people. Annoyed by a delay, Karen glanced back with tight eyes and told me to hurry because I was slowing them down. They led me past ticket counters, past families hugging and waving at gates, past smiles and tears, until we reached oversized baggage claim. It was a wide industrial space with metal benches bolted to the floor. Golf bags, car seats, and odd-shaped boxes rolled out onto a metal carousel. The air smelled like jet fuel and old coffee. Kevin told me to sit on the bench and watch the bags. He said they needed to get tickets and told me not to move until they returned. I said my words quietly and small, asking about the time. Karen told me to count the bags and said that by the time I reached 500, they would be back. She did not look at me when she spoke. Her eyes were already fixed on the glowing exit signs. I sat down. I pulled the red scarf up over my nose and started counting. I counted suitcases, skis, a guitar case, a taped cardboard box. I counted slowly, carefully, because counting felt like a job, and jobs meant purpose. I reached 50, then 100. The crowd thinned. The belt's noise became steady and almost soothing. 200, 300. By the time I reached 500, the carousel stopped. The last bag rolled away. The people were gone. The lights dimmed slightly, buzzing with that low sound lonely places make when they are no longer meant for people. I sat there gripping the scarf, and something settled inside me that a child should never have to understand. They were not late. They were not confused. The look on their faces when they walked away had not been fear. It had been relief. They left me there because that was what I was to them. Something heavy. Something inconvenient. Something to be dropped off and never picked up. The silence came next. Not gentle silence, but thick and crushing. It pressed down on my chest until breathing felt hard. That silence broke something inside me. It stole my voice. For years after that night, I barely spoke. I let life move around me because making sound felt dangerous. It took decades to learn that silence could be a tool, not just a scar. Now, when I sit on the bench and let a courtroom go quiet, I control it. I use it to command respect. But back then, in Terminal 3, the silence controlled me. It told me I was nothing. Time passed without shape. Eventually, a security guard on a Segway rolled by, slowed, then circled back. Before he could speak, a man stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He had been watching, waiting to see if anyone would return. He was tall, wore a gray suit, and had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He did not look heroic. He looked ordinary. The guard reached for his radio, saying he would call social services. The man spoke softly but firmly, and said no. He walked over and knelt in front of me, ignoring the grime on the floor. He did not touch me. He simply looked at me, really looked at me, like I mattered. He told me his name was William. He said he had seen them leave. He said he was sorry. He did not lie to me. He did not promise they were coming back. He gave me the truth. And that honesty saved me from the lie I was trying to believe. William stayed. He stayed when the police arrived. He stayed through foster care meetings. And eventually, he stayed forever. He became the safety net that caught me when my own blood let me fall. He lived quietly, the same way he helped, without attention or praise. William died on a Tuesday morning. Quietly, just like his life. There were no headlines, no public praise. Only a small service attended by shelter staff he had supported for years without telling anyone. I sat in the front row wearing the red scarf, feeling the old silence return. He had been my anchor, the one person who proved I was not just luggage left behind. When the will was read, I expected a house or modest savings. Instead, I was handed a thick portfolio. William had not just been a retired accountant. He had invested early in major tech startups and lived simply so he could give freely. The final number totaled $5,500,000. Every year of his career counted. He left all of it to me. 2 days later, the news broke. The calls followed, not from family, but from a process server. A lawsuit arrived at my door. Fraudulent custody, estate theft. Kevin and Karen Hart were the plaintiffs. They did not ask how I was. They did not ask to see me. They sued. They claimed abduction, claimed lifelong grief, claimed restitution and property. I read the complaint calmly. It was beautifully written fiction. I did not cry. I did not panic. I read it like a judge. And then I saw it clearly. To them, I had never been a child. I had been an asset. When I was 5, I was a liability. So they abandoned me. 30 years later, my value changed. I was no longer a burden. I was a payout. They did not return for love. They returned to collect. It wasn't love. It was accounting. They were trying to balance their books with my life. And the audacity of it, the sheer unmitigated greed, burned away the last vestiges of the frightened Edlid girl inside me. They thought they were suing a victim. They didn't realize that they were suing the law itself. I put papers down. I didn't call a lawyer immediately. Instead, I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. I saw these of the child who counted to 500. I saw the woman who had put criminals behind bars for less than this. Motion denied. I whispered to the empty room. It picked up my phone and dialed the best forensic accountant in the state. I need you to dig, I said. Go back to 1994. Find everything. They wanted a fight. I would give them a war and I would make sure the cost of this lawsuit weighs everything they had left. I didn't answer the lawsuit. I didn't call Kevin or Karen to scream or beg or ask why. That's what a daughter would do. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a plaintiff building a case against 2 defendants who had made a fatal calculation error. I went into chambers mode. In my line of work, we don't operate on feelings. We operate on evidence. I called Sarah Jenkins, the most ruthless forensic accountant in Chicago. I gave her one instruction. Go back to 1994. Find out where they got their money because grifters don't change. If they were greedy enough to sue me now, if they were greedy enough to have tried to profit off me then, you don't just walk away from a child and not try to capitalize on the loss. For 3 days, my dining room table turned into a war room. We pulled tax returns, old property records, and court archivists that smelled like dust and rot. Most people think the past is buried. It isn't. It's just waiting on microfiche, Sarah found the anomaly on a Tuesday night. Sam, she said, her voice flat, look, at 1995. I leaned over her shoulder. There, buried in a stack of digitized court filings from Cook County, was a civil suit docket number. Kevin and Karen Hart versus American Continental Airlines. They hadn't just walked away. They had sued the airline. I pulled the full case file. My hands didn't shake. They were steady, cold, turning the pages of Meown Eraser. The complaint was a work-off art. They claimed that on November 6, 1994, they had entrusted their belvedere to an airline agent at the gate for an unaccompanied minor flight to visit a sick relative. They claimed the airline had been negligent. They claimed he had wandered off and vanished because seat staff wasn't watching. It was a lie. There was no ticket. There was no sick relative. They had walked me to baggage echelon and left me there. But in 1995, without cameras everywhere, without digital tracking, they could spin ashtray. They claimed emotional distress and loss of consortium. They claimed that they were broken parents whose child had been swallowed by the system. And then I saw the settlement agreement. The airline, desperate to avoid bad press about a missing child, had settled out of court. The check was for $4,500 in 1995. That was a fortune. It was enough to buy a house, 2 cars, and a lifetime of silence. But the check wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was the affidavit attached to the settlement. To get the money, Kevin and Karen had to sign a sworn statement. I read the words, and for the first time in 30 years, I felt the air leave their room. We, the parents, acknowledged their minor child, Samantha Hart, is presumed deceased. We accept this settlement as full and final compensation for the wrongful death and loss of our child, and we absolve the airline of all future liability. They had signed it. Kevin's signature was jagged. Karen's was loopy and neat. They had legally declared me dead. They had looked at a piece of paper that said it didn't exist anymore, and they had signed it in exchange for a check. They didn't lose me. They liquidated me. I sat back in my chair. The anger that had been simmering in my gut didn't boil over. It crystallized. It turned into something hard and sharp like a diamond. They had sold my life for $450,000. Spent it all. And now they were back to sell me again. They thought I was a ghost. They thought ghosts couldn't fight back. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. I have it, I said. Don't settle. We're going to trial. I looked at the signatures one last time. They had signed my death warrant. Now, I was going to sign theirs. The trial was Teeter, and Kevin and Karen were the headliners. They took the stand wearing muted colors. Their expressions practiced masks of grief. Karen wept onk. She talked about the hole in her heart that never healed. She described the agony of the unknown, painting a picture of 2 devoted parents who had been victimized by a wealthy predator who stole their baby in a busy terminal. It was a compelling performance. If I hadn't lived the truth, I might have believed them. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like victims. They looked like parents who had spent 30 years setting a place at the dinner table for a ghost. I watched from the defense table, my face impassive. I didn't object. I didn't interrupt. I let them build their monument to grief, brick by lying brick, because the higher they built it, the harder it would fall. When the defense's turn came, we didn't call character witnesses. We didn't call experts. We called one name. The defensicals. Megan Hart. The air left the room. Kevin's head snapped toward the gallery doors. Karen let out a small strangled gasp. They hadn't seen this coming. They thought Megan, the daughter they kept, the daughter they raised, was loyal. They thought she was part of the con. Megan walked down the aisle. She was 28, a social worker with tired eyes and a posture that apologized for taking up space. She didn't look at our parents. She looked straight at me. It was like looking into a mirror that had aged differently. We had the same nose, the same jawline. But where I had grown hard, she had grown heavy. She took the stand. She swore the oath. And then she dismantled their lives. Megan, my attorney, asked, what was it like growing up in the Hart household? Megan took a breath that shook her entire frame. It was like living in a mausoleum, she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. I wasn't just their daughter. I was their placement. I grew up in the shadow of tragic lost sister. But it wasn't about missing Samantha. It was embarrassing her. This was the ghost sibling paradox. I had always assumed Megan was the lucky one. She was the one who got to go home. She was the one who got the prince. But as she spoke, I realized I had it wrong. I had escaped. She had been trapped in the performance for 28 years. They used the story, Megan continued. Every time rent was late, every time dad lost money gambling, they would bring up the tragedy. The church gave them money. The neighbors brought casseroles for years. My sister wasn't a person to them. He was currency. Her absence paid the bills. Karen stood up, her face red. Megan, stop this. Don't you dare. Sit down. The babe barked. Megan didn't flinch. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a shoebox. It smelled like mildew and old Addis insulation. They told everyone they spent every dime searching for her. Megan said, they told me they hired investigators. They told me they scorched the earth. But when I was cleaning out the attic last week looking for old photos, I found this sheep in the box. It wasn't full of missing persons flyers. It wasn't full of correspondence with the police. It's casino receipts. Megan said, from Theme Press Riverboat Casino in Joliet. She held up a handful of faded thermal paper. These are dated November 7th, 8th, and 9th, 1994. The week Samantha disappeared. While the police were looking for her at the airport, Kevin and Karen were gambling. They weren't searching. They were celebrating. Silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the same heavy, suffocating silence I remembered from the baggage echelon. But this time, it wasn't crushing. It was crushing them. Megan looked at our parents, tears finally spilling over. I used to feel guilty that I wasted one who got to stay, she whispered. But now I realize Samantha was the one who got away. I was the one who was left behind. Kevin sank into his chair. A man whose entire existence had just been exposed as a hollow fraud. They hadn't just abandoned one daughter. They had devoured the other. My attorney didn't give the room time to breathe. Megan's testimony had cracked the foundation, but we needed to bring the whole house down. He walked to the bench and placed a single yellow document in front of the presiding judge. It was a certified copy of the 1995 settlement agreement from Cook County Archives. Your Honor, has aid, his voice cutting through the stunned whispers of the gallery. The plaintiffs are suing for custody of an estate based on their parental rights. However, according to this sworn affidavit signed on December 12, 1995, Kevin and Karen Hart legally declared their daughter, Samantha Hart, deceased. Kevin's face went the color of ash. Karen grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his cheap suit jacket. They knew exactly what that paper was. It was receipt for my life. The presiding judge read the document. Her eyes narrowed. She looked from the paper to the plaintiffs, and the expression on her face wasn't judicial neutrality anymore. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, the judge said, her voice dangerously low. You accepted for 50 low from American Continental Airlines for the wrongful death of your child, using the statement claiming she was gone. So, one of two things is true right now. Either you committed grand larceny and fraud in 1995, or you are committing perjury and fraud upon the court today. Which is it? The trap snapped shut. If they admitted I was alive back then, they were felons who had stolen $500,000. If they stuck to their story that I was dead, they had no standing to sue me now because ghosts don't have heirs. Their lawyer, realizing he had been led into a minefield, physically stepped away from them. He began packing his briefcase. He stood up. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't wait for my lawyer to speak. I walked around the defense table and stood in the center of the aisle facing them. For 30 years, I had been afraid of these people. I had let their memory haunt every quiet room I entered. But looking at them now, shivering, trapped, and small, I realized I wasn't looking at monsters. I was looking at parasites. You sold me, I said. I didn't yell. I used the voice I used when sentencing a violent offender. Cold, flat, and final. You didn't just leave me at the airport. You cashed me in. You put a price tag on your own daughter. And you spent it on blackjack and slot machines. Karen tried to speak. She opened her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The same performance she had used on the church, the neighbors, and Megan. "Samantha, please," she choked out. "We were young. We were scared. We loved you. You declared me dead." I interrupted, using a paper saying I didn't exist anymore so you could buy a boat. "Well, congratulations. You were right. The daughter you had is dead. She died in terminal 3. I leaned in closer, letting silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. This was the gavel of silence. I wasn't drowning in it anymore. I was wielding it. A ghost cannot inherit, Kevin, but a ghost can haunt you. And I promise you I will haunt you with every legal instrument at me disposal until you wish you had never walked back into my life." The presiding judge banged her gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. "Case dismissed with prejudice. Babe, please escort the plaintiffs into custody. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation into insurance fraud and perjury." Kevin and Karen started screaming as the officers moved in, but I didn't watch. I turned me back on them just like they had turned their backs on me. "Continue." The fallout was absolute. The statute of limitations on the 1995 settlement fraud was a complex legal knot, but the perjury they committed in open court was fresh. They were indicted 3 weeks later. The local news, which had initially run the story of the judge's secret fortune, now ran a very different headline. "The parents who sold their child. The reputation was incinerated. The church cut them off. The neighbors who had brought casseroles for 30 years demanded explanations they couldn't give. They lost their house to legal fees. They were left with nothing. No money, no status, and no daughters. I didn't keep $5.5 million. William hadn't given it to me to buy a yacht. He had given it to me to build a safety net. I used the money to launch the Baggage Claim Foundation. We provide top-tier legal defense for foster children aging out of the system, ensuring that when the state stops caring, someone else steps in. We make sure no child ever has to stand alone in a terminal wondering if they matter." 6 months later, I sat in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. Across the table, Megan was laughing at something I said. She looked different. The weight was gone from her shoulders. She had quit her job at the agency and come to work for the foundation as our lead social worker. We were building a relationship from scratch, brick by brick, without the rot of our parents' lives between us. I reached for my coffee and the sleeve of my coat pulled up, revealing the red wool scarf I was wearing. I didn't wear it because I was cold. I wore it because it looked good. It wasn't a shield anymore. It was just a scarf. The coffee shop was noisy, full of clattering cups and chatter. But for a moment, I let myself listen to the silence underneath it all. It wasn't the terrifying, lonely silence of the airport. It was the peaceful silence of a closed case. It was the silence of a debt finally paid in full. I looked at Megan. I looked at the work we were doing, and I realized that William was right. I wasn't the girl who was left behind. I was the girl who was caught.